Okay, today is Saturday, February the 4th, 2012, and I'm Karen Jernigan, and we are here for another interview with Ernest Clement, who was a native of King City. And in our last interview, we talked about Ernest's early years as a child and what he remembers about his parents and grandparents and their relationship to the Salinas Valley. And so today, Ernest, we're going to start about in the middle of the 1930s. We remembered, or I remember, that you were born in August 12th, 1925, correct?
Right.
And so let's start about the time that you went to high school, because we want to talk a little bit about King City High School. So you would have been about what age when you started high school? Let's see if we can remember that.
14, I believe.
14, okay, so age 14. And so that would have been what year that you started?
1939.
39 was when you started high school. And then you graduated in what year?
In 43.
1943.
Right.
Okay. So do you remember the first day at high school, or what do you remember about starting high school?
I remember it was confusing because you changed classes and you went to various rooms and so forth, but it worked out well because the school was fairly small at that time. And
do you recall how many students there were in 1939?
I would guess that it was around 300, maybe.
About 300.
Give or take a little.
Okay. And the high school was located where?
It's on the corner of Mildred and Broadway.
Okay. So that's where it is now.
Right.
And that would have not been too far from your ranch.
Right.
So you would have walked to school?
We usually had a ride in because there were several kids going in at the same time.
Okay.
But very often, because we got out at different times, I often walked home from school.
Okay. Were there the usual subjects?
Yes,
classes?
Math, English. I can't remember. Later, there were some biology courses and chemistry and history, the usual.
Okay. Do you remember it being a good experience, or was it troubling, or?
No, it was a good experience.
Okay.
I don't remember any particular problems, except just day-to-day things, you know, getting assignments in, the usual pressures of school.
Were there sports activities?
There were some. There was a football team, and I think a baseball team. Track was always a part of that. I can't remember other things. I think the courses that were taught were somewhat limited because of the size of the school, and probably funding, because it was in the latter part of the Depression. And, well, of course, World War II started in that time, too, so that had a big effect on the school.
In what way?
Well, funding was cut back, I think, and gas rationing, I think, was a big problem because it was a union school district, meaning that students were bused in from a large area.
Okay.
And some rode buses for many miles every day. And I think everyone was affected. I know everyone was affected by that in various ways. I remember when we had air raid drills, we had blackouts. I think they were mainly training things so that if an emergency happened, people would be familiar with what is expected, turning out lights and that sort of thing.
I believe that the King City High School auditorium was built about that time. Do you recall any of that?
It was built shortly before I started high school. I don't remember seeing much of any of the construction. And I believe it was probably completed about 1936 or 7. It was completed before I started high school, but it hadn't been there very long. And it was considered quite modern at that time, not the usual conservative construction. The original high school had kind of a Spanish architecture, tile roof and arched porticos and so forth.
So I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that they dedicated the auditorium in early 1939. So that would have been very new. We'll look and we'll double check on that.
Yeah.
But then I think the newspaper clippings that we have are early 39. So you would have been one of the first classes there with it completed. However, I'm sure it took multiple years to.
It was a big job because it was poured concrete, reinforced concrete, which was, at least in my recollection, it was a fairly new building process. At least it was for King City, and I know it was completed before I started high school in the fall of 1939.
Did you ever walk by and see it under construction or recall any of that?
I don't remember that.
Okay, all right. Okay, and were there plays or concerts or things that you attended at the auditorium?
Yes, because it was on the school, it's a school auditorium, it was used for community events too, but I remember every year they had, I think the junior class put on a play, the senior class put on a play. There were concerts for community. There was a community concert association for a few years that brought in things like musical groups and a variety of things like that that used the auditorium. Not so much maybe during the war years because those activities were pretty much curtailed. But it was used by the community as well as the school. So,
when do you recall the start of World War II?
Yes.
And when was that?
Well, it was December 7th, 1941. It was a Sunday morning. And I remember coming out of the worship service at the community church, and car radios were fairly new. It wasn't common in all cars, but there was a car there that had a radio, and they turned it on as people were coming out, and the news of this, the raid on Pearl Harbor was being broadcast, and people were gathering around this car in silence to listen to that, because at first it was hard to comprehend. I believe there was a group of people that thought it must be a hoax. In other words, it was questioned as to whether this was some sensational broadcast, like Orson Welles was great at doing that. And it took a while to realize the impact of this, that Pearl Harbor was being bombed. And all the impact of that, it took us a while to understand that. And I think everyone left rather quietly because they were absorbing the impact of what that meant. And a lot of uncertainty. For instance, the thinking was if the Japanese had crossed the Pacific far enough to come into Hawaii, they could come on across to the California coast, the west coast of the United States. And I know there were people that were talking about that. You know, we're very close to the coast here, and we could be in the middle of that. In fact, there were sightings, I believe, of one or more submarines. We can just ignore that. And there were, in fact, there was a sinking near San Luis Obispo here of an oil tanker, I think it was, the Montebello, was sunk in those early days by a Japanese submarine. And I think it was not publicized because they did not want to cause a panic here on the coast.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You can go ahead and wherever that is. Is it in your pocket?
No, I have
Okay.
it turned off.
Oh, okay. So he'll leave it.
It's in the bedroom.
Okay. Okay. Great. Okay. Excellent. So hang on and let me know when you're ready to go. Okay? Yeah. So we were talking about the early days of World War II, and so you can, in your mind, clearly remember when you first found out about the bombing of Pearl Harbor.
Yes.
And it was standing around an old. Do you remember the type of car?
No, I don't remember, but it belonged to the Hayes family, Austin
okay.
and Catherine Hayes, whose some of their offspring still live in King City.
And so everybody was gathered around their car. Huh?
Yes.
In
shock over what had happened.
Wow. So were there things then that happened in school because of that? Was there any kind of discussion, or do you recall that?
I don't recall anything in school that was, the result of that or dealing with that. I'm sure there were things, but I just don't remember them.
Okay. And then were there people from your school that joined the service because of that?
Oh yes, there were quite a few that dropped out of school and joined the military in various branches of the military.
But you would have been what,
I was 16
a sophomore or junior, and
well, I would be in there somewhere.
Okay. And any of your friends that dropped out and joined?
There were some. Okay. I can't recall the names, but there were quite a few that did that.
Okay.
Some finished high school.
That must have been about the time that you were learning to drive. Did you learn to drive when you were 16 like we do now?
Oh, yes.
Yeah?
I wouldn't leave my parents alone until I got my license, because that was very important at that time.
How did you learn to drive? Or did you already know from having lived on a ranch?
No, I didn't. I hadn't operated machinery, and of course, getting a driver's license was fairly simple at that time.
Okay.
My father taught me to drive, and of course, we had a stick shift, and automatic transmissions were not even thought of at that time. And so I learned to drive on the ranch, and then you studied the manual and went in, I think, to the DMV office, took the written test and then a driver's test, and I had my license.
And was the DMV office where it was for a long time on 2nd Street?
No, I don't remember where it was. I believe maybe it was in the City Hall, maybe, but
okay.
The DMV office that we recall on 2nd was built much later.
Oh, okay. All right.
I think the City Hall was the center of a lot of those activities. It was kind of the government center.
Did you have any good or bad experiences while driving or learning to drive in King City?
Not while learning to drive, and of course, because it was war years, we didn't do any unnecessary driving.
Ah, okay.
Gas was rationed, and you just didn't run around. Many people, well, most people had only one car. There were some that had no car. They walked around town, and life was very different then.
Did people ride bicycles, or?
More than they do now, yes.
Okay.
And of course, the town was small, so if one just planned for it, people walked to the grocery store and to the post office, to church and to school.
Okay. So the post office, was that a place where people?
Well, the post office was more at the center of things. People, there were posters up on the bulletin boards there and so forth, and it was somewhat of a gathering place.
And where was it?
The original post office, was on Broadway, on the north side of the street, between 2nd and 3rd Street.
Okay. Oh. wasn't that by the livery stable?
In the same block, and it was, yes, not far from that.
Okay.
Between that and the Monterey County Bank, which later became Wells Fargo.
Okay.
It was in there for quite a number of years. Then the post office moved over onto 3rd Street, on the west side of the street, and I think it's where the PG&E office is now.
Oh, okay.
And it was there for quite a number of years before it moved across the street onto the corner of, what would it be, Bassett or Bassett and Vanderhurst, and 3rd Street.
Yeah, into Bassett and 3rd.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, there was a period of time during the construction of, I think it was construction of the present post office, where the post office was temporarily down on 1st Street, down near Earl Old's machine shop. It was a temporary thing, I think, between one post office and the other, but it was a temporary thing, and probably for a few months, and then they moved into the
to the new one, huh?
into that 3rd building, 3rd location.
So now you said you and your family went to the Community Baptist Church,
Yes.
and
Yes.
that was at Bassett and South San Lorenzo.
South Vanderhurst.
South, no, yeah.
Right.
I'm too far down. South Vanderhurst.
Right.
Do you remember any other churches in town?
Yes, the Episcopal Church, which is on the other corner of that block, was there for a long time. It was one of the early ones.
Okay.
The Catholic Church, of course, was on the same street over on the corner of, what is it, Bassett and San Lorenzo? No, it would be
Russ.
somewhere in there.
Yeah, Bassett and Russ, right. Across from the mortuary, huh?
Yes, yes. And then it moved, I guess it was after the war years, moved over onto the north side of town where it is now.
North Third, yeah.
I don't recall other churches in that area at that time.
So those two main ones, and then the church that your
Well,
family...
three, yeah, the community, the Episcopal Church, the Catholic Church. At that time, there were some others that came in a little later, but in the early days, I think that was all.
Okay. Anything else that you remember about high school and those years growing up in King City?
Well, I remember some of the teachers. They were influential, and they were there for a long period of time. And
what were their names?
well, I remember a Miss Bunty, who was the girls' PE teacher, and I think she taught maybe some other classes. I don't remember, but basically girls' PE. And there was a boys' coach by the name of Carlton Wood, who was there for a long time. And then there was a Mr. Runstrom, who was a science teacher. Mr. Webb was history and that sort of thing. And at that time, there were two shop teachers. Mr. Watts, I.J. Watts, taught the wood shop, and I believe he taught a class in mechanical drawing and that sort of thing. And then in the north end of that building was an auto shop, was taught by a man by the name of Charlie Walker, who was there for many years. And there were some students that more or less majored in mechanical arts of various kinds.
So,
and then, of course, there was a fairly large agriculture department. Cecil Thompson taught it. Because it was an agricultural community that was fairly large. I didn't participate in that, but it was a fairly large department.
So probably the auto shop is still the one that is there at the high school
The
now?
building is still there, and the auto shop was in the north end of it, the wood shop was in the south end, and then the mechanical drawing was in a part of that south end. But the building is still there. I don't know what it's being used for, because I don't think they teach those manual arts.
Not as much anymore. It's pretty sparse.
Right.
And then the big rounded gymnasium, was that there when you were
Yes.
in school?
Yes, It was kind of the center of that original building. The offices were in the front part of that, and then right behind the offices was the gymnasium. And then there were wings on both sides with a patio area out in the middle. And I think there were about, in the original building, maybe about 6 classrooms.
But that was part of the older part
Yes,
of it, right?
yes,
But
the
now
original.
Now they have a gymnasium that's got like a big round
Yes,
roof.
that was
That's
after.
newer,
That's
right?
after I left.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
The original gymnasium was right behind a large room was the library, and they called it study hall. If you had a class that was not assigned, you went to study hall, and it was a time when students had access to the library, or they just used it for completing assignments and so forth.
So later, like in the 60s, they tore down that building.
Yes, I don't remember when it was done, but sometime after I left, and they began. Well, I think out and back they replaced, or they started building other units, and it was a gradual thing.
Were you sorry to see the old building torn down, or did you feel like it was necessary for?
It was a little nostalgic because it had some character, some charm. It had that kind of a Spanish facade there, and I like the old building, but I think it was time to be replaced. It was outdated and probably outgrown too. I guess basically I resist change. I like the way I grew up, yes.
Actually, I think this might be a good time for us to look at those pictures, and maybe I can bring those out and show them to Ernest. We have some pictures of the construction of the auditorium, and so we kind of wanted to show those to you so you could kind of see them. School, right there. So here would have been the corner where you lived, right here. This has got to be division.
Okay, yes. This is the original Stampede grounds, fairgrounds and so forth. What year was this picture taken, do you know?
Oh, does it have a...
This goes back a ways.
Yeah.
1946.
46.
Yeah, so...
I'm having trouble getting oriented. Now this would be...
This would be...
San Lorenzo?
Yeah, because the school would be down here. Okay, so this, if this is San Lorenzo, this would be City Hall right in here.
Yes, in here somewhere.
So here's Vanderhurst, and then the next one would be...
Well, there's a dead-end
Lorenzo.
street here.
Yeah,
There's a
Russ.
Russ.
Yeah.
And this is San Lorenzo.
And that would be then Mildred, or the alley there that goes...
Yeah, this would be like the forestry, I think that would have been. And this was farming land in here yet, and there was a family by the name of Toonsey that originally, I don't know if they owned it, but he farmed that, I think this whole block.
So were these like the pig barns
I
that
think
they used
these
to have
are
for the fairgrounds?
livestock barns,
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, they've torn all those down there.
It's a little hard to recognize
Isn't that
some of the
interesting?
landmarks. Okay, now this is the eucalyptus windbreak that went across. Okay, this is
Okay, so here's...
3rd Street that went out. This is out to the Spreckles Ranch.
Okay, right there, 3rd
And there was
Street,
a labor camp here, and the eucalyptus that went clear over to the railroad.
Sure did.
And our place we
just
farmed
off the-
was over here,
Just
off
a
the
little bit off the map there, huh?
map.
It's a pretty neat picture, isn't it?
This is very interesting. I hadn't seen this picture before.
That's very neat. Okay, so that's one. And then this is the carvings that are, now this is not at the auditorium, this is somewhere else, but this was
And
a
his
picture
name was what?
of Joe Mora. He was
And he did the bronzes that were on the doors. And do they know where those went? Or
Nope.
that's a shame because those were beautiful. You remember those?
John does. I don't,
They were very
Until
distinctive,
later.
and I think good artwork.
Okay, so this is the building of the high school auditorium.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the, which side is this, John? This must be the old,
That's the green room right there.
oh, right here. This is the green room where you come in and the actors go in.
Mm-hmm.
So this would be Mildred over here.
Okay.
And this is where the new music building is, but that was an older one there. So isn't this pretty cool with all the forms
Yes,
and
yes.
stuff here?
I don't remember seeing that. I'm sure I did,
You
but
might have, yeah.
and this is what I
And
remember.
it's kind of finished.
And the rounded corners.
Yep. And then this is another one. This one's not as clear. They're working on that. But this is one with all the old
The
cars in
front,
front of
yes.
it. This is from Mildred.
Yes.
So this would be across the street pretty much
Yes.
from our house.
Right.
Which has got a tree there and some old cars there. Pretty
So
cool,
this
huh?
would have been late 30s.
Right. And you got
Yes,
the cars to come
very
up.
very different. Well, that building would be, what, 70 years old or so now?
It's really something, huh?
Yes.
So that's that side there.
Well, it's kind of interesting. I don't know how the funding went on that, but it would have been the latter part of the Depression years when there were some WPA and
Right.
PWA fundings, which would be comparable to our stimulus programs
Right,
now.
exactly. And then some of these are...
This is
no
the
longer
back
there.
part. In other words, the entrance is over here.
Right, that's
Yeah.
the side by the...
Well, I've never seen these pictures
Yeah,
before.
we had not either until about a year ago.
Who had these? Do you recall?
The Stanton
Yeah.
Archives had them.
Which,
and they-
where is that located?
In Monterey,
Monterey,
right? Yeah, and they were nice enough to let us have them, and then we made these big copies.
Did Stanton do architecture for other buildings in the Central Coast?
He sure did. The Salinas Courthouse,
That's
right,
correct.
John?
Oh, really?
Salinas Courthouse.
That's
was-
quite an impressive building, too.
Yeah.
Similar in style to
exactly.
this.
And so here we've got like scaffolding going up, and
Yes.
here's where they were doing the relief there.
Right.
And more
The
work
old
for
cars.
us. Yeah, isn't that cool? And then
Yes.
this picture we really like. This is looking down
Mm-hmm.
from the roof down into the stage area
Okay.
there. Isn't that
And look at
amazing?
the complexity of the framework. I don't know, some of that scaffolding and some of it is the, steel reinforcement, I think, because all of that is poured concrete.
Now, there is I understand, like a bomb shelter down underneath
Really?
the auditorium. Were you ever down
No.
in there?
I don't recall that.
Yeah, that's what
Well,
I understand.
you know, I didn't know that or have forgotten.
And you never went down in there, huh?
I don't recall ever being down there, and this would have been before World War II, so I'd be surprised if it was built as a bomb shelter. It could have been,
been just like a basement.
like utilities, you know, maybe
Yeah.
the heating system there, or electrical panels.
So here we have some workers, and here we have some eucalyptus trees over there. They're pretty neat. And then here's another one. kind
These
of
are
a
good
scene.
pictures.
Aren't they great?
Very
Yeah,
good.
we just really enjoyed seeing them.
I don't know how long that took. It must have taken several years, really, because
Right.
of the size and the complexity of
Now
it.
this is here's the roof of the auditorium
Yes.
looking towards the east.
Mm-hmm.
And so Mildred would be down here. And you said
Yes.
this is Patterson's Grove?
Patterson's Grove, and you see how dense it is. They were rather densely planted in there, and they were quite big. And it was as big as 2 lots are now. Patterson Street would have gone through the middle of that grove, so it would be like 2 square blocks of what is there now. And you'll notice all of these other, eucalyptus trees probably, but a lot of large trees in town. Eucalyptus was planted because of the King City wind. Eucalyptus makes a good windbreak and grows fairly fast, and it's an upright tree. So it's good for a windbreak. It was used widely then. And you'll notice some of the buildings here, there were a few old barns right in town because
really?
of
Do you
course.
know anything about that old barn?
No, I don't recall that. But of course this was during the time I should have, I could have remembered it. But
Now you know whose house this is. This was Lou Tully's house.
Are you
This
sure?
is behind me, because my house would be right here along Mildred. And yes, we can, and so King's Place then came in here and did a cul-de-sac.
Okay.
And all those houses were not there, but
Right.
this one is. And if you look at this now, it's still got this little arch, and it's
Yes.
got these. And then Doc Andrus ended up building
Yes.
their family homes over here.
So your house is right on here
Underneath,
somewhere.
yeah, well, see,
right
here's
across.
The lip, yeah, here's the lip of the
Right.
the roof there, and so you cannot see our house.
But Patterson Grove was a very distinctive feature at that time. And I think in the corner of this, the first house that I remember being built in here was, I've lost it now. But I don't know if, I think it was cleared in this area, and there was a house built in there very early. And then on the opposite corner there was a clearing, and there was a house built in there that has kind of an English style with a steep roof and some wood framing that's exposed. A very nice home. I can't remember who built that.
Well, there was Catherine Whitney had her house
Yes,
right over here,
yeah.
and the Culvers lived
Yes.
there next door, and then the Holmans, Stella Holman was on one corner, and Tony and Rose Holman on another. Now here's a water tank, which we thought was
Yes.
interesting.
Well, before there was a central water system, everyone had a well.
And of course, here's very faint the water tower
Yes,
off here in
yes.
the distance, and then a few. You can see this house on the corner here, which I believe is still there. And here's another
Yes.
water tower.
Well, windmills were common in those days because we had so much wind. Windmills were very efficient, and they were widely used.
Pretty interesting.
Very.
Huh? And then over here, I believe
Well,
this
let's
was
see.
the Hobbles house, the old one on the corner.
Yes, well,
Well, maybe not. Maybe
No,
this
I don't
was
think
the
if your street is down here,
Yeah.
what's on the corner of that now?
yeah, and see, I don't know exactly what that is either, but it ran right into that.
I think
Interesting,
I'd
huh?
have to go over there and with this
Check
in
it out,
mind,
huh? Check it out, huh? Label
identify
it,
what
yeah.
is still left.
Right. Because things get torn
This
down.
is very interesting, and
Cool.
this isn't that old, so I should remember some of that, but I don't.
Well, you were a young boy. You were probably thinking
Well,
about other things.
Change happens slowly over the years, and we don't realize until after the fact that so much has changed.
Well, anyway, it was fun looking at that, and we kept thinking, well, our house should be in there but it's blocked.
It's in
by
too
this
close.
view. Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah. So
I don't remember those
big trees.
trees
huh?
in there, eucalyptus trees that are long gone. Most of the eucalyptus have been taken out because they're a trashy tree.
Well, they are. We just saw a bunch of debris the other day.
Yes.
Too. And this is kind of a neat picture with the
Yeah.
workers up here and putting in the forms of the. So anyway, that was the main one. This one here where we could kind of see those older things.
It moves, it's all up and down the valley here, and
Okay, so Ernest, I have a couple more questions for you, and then I want to look at some of the pictures on your wall of your ancestors.
Sure.
So, do you remember graduating from high school?
yes.
What do you remember about that?
Well, at the time it seemed like a big event.
Okay.
It's sort of one of the rites of growing up, rites of passage. And I felt like we'd really accomplished something. I
Okay.
look on it now and I say, We were just getting started. But at that time, it was an important event. And it was in the new auditorium, so it seemed prestigious.
Did both of your parents graduate from high school? Or
No, neither of them graduated.
Okay. All right. And so was that meaningful to them to see their son graduate?
Yes, I think so. I think it's always satisfying to see your children achieve more than you did. And on that subject, it's kind of interesting how when I was growing up, I never visualized going to college. It just didn't seem in the future for me. And it took me a number of years to get to the point where I actually did it.
Oh.
But it was another milestone, I thought, even though I was an average student in grade school and high school, I just never visualized myself as being college material until I had some years under my belt, and I'd been in the military, and I'd worked for a number of years, and I realized that I was probably capable of doing that, and I wanted to try something different. And one of the things that made me realize this is the fact that the people I related to most and were interested in were college graduates. And even though that in itself doesn't make people interesting, it opens up a whole area or areas of interest and ability. And so I'm glad that I had that opportunity, but I was in my 30s when I did that. And it was meaningful to me.
Well, I think then the next time we talk, if you're open to more conversations,
Certainly.
we'll talk about your time beyond high school and that stage of your life, and then on into your working years in King City. Two topics that I just want to briefly touch on is you talked about a place called Patterson's Grove.
Yes.
And so tell me a little bit about that.
I don't, the first memories that I have of it were the fact that it was just a big grove of trees.
Okay.
And
eucalyptus trees.
Eucalyptus trees.
Okay.
They were very large, and it was a rather dense planting there. And I never knew exactly what it was put there for. It wasn't just a windbreak, a single row of trees, but it was 2 blocks of rather densely planted eucalyptus trees.
Okay.
I believe that I had heard that there was back in time, there was the idea that eucalyptus would make good lumber if it was cut and used for lumber. And it turned out not to be good for that. I don't know why exactly, it just wasn't good lumber material. So I think maybe that was the origin of that. It was going to be a lumber source.
Because it wasn't a native
no.
thing.
Australia is the point of origin for all that. But California's climate is so similar to parts of Australia that it adapted very well.
So who was Mr. Patterson?
Mr. Patterson, whom I never knew, but he at one time was the Lieutenant Governor of California.
Okay.
And what his connection was with King City, I just don't know. Whether he was in business there, but he owned property there. Beyond that, I don't know.
Okay, and so the grove was named after him?
I understand that was right.
And then it later had a street named after it?
Yes, when it was subdivided.
And that was where the street went right through where the grove was?
Yes, right through the middle of it.
Do you remember them cutting down the trees? Because I don't think there's any left.
No, there are none left.
Okay.
I don't remember really. I know that was developed at some point in time. When, I don't remember. Probably after World War II. But it was subdivided and built on.
Okay. So So now I have another thing I want to kind of pick your brain about. Do you remember a place on Bitterwater Road called the Stampede Grounds?
Yes.
What do you remember about that?
It was out of town, I believe, 2 or 3 miles. It was a ways out of town. It was on the Bitterwater Road, I believe. And it was in a little, well, it wasn't a valley. It was just a low spot between some hills.
Okay.
It was fairly primitive, I think, as far as the facilities were. And for several years, I think the Stampede was out there.
Did you ever go to it?
I think we attended it a time or two, but
Okay.
rodeos are really not my strong point,
Okay.
my strong interest. And but I did go out there. How long they had them there, I don't remember, but there was enough interest in it that eventually the Stampede grounds were moved into King City, and they were elaborated on. There were bleachers put in and better facilities for cattle chutes and pens and so forth. And of course that stayed in town for many years. And it was replaced eventually by the park there in King City. And the swimming pool is in that area.
And not far from where you lived for
Right.
a lot of years.
Right.
Okay, 710. Okay, so more of a social place that people went to work with horses and have some kind of entertainment.
Yes, I think maybe, I'm not sure about this, but I believe maybe there were facilities there for animals to be kept. Maybe individuals. I just don't know about that.
All right. So this is what?
This is a family Bible from my grandparents, the Thayers, and it goes back into their history. In the center here between the Old Testament and New Testament is their family, their marriage date and all of their children. They moved around and ended up in Greenfield.
Yes, and I see there's a Greenfield entry there.
Yes.
And there's a Greenfield entry here.
And some of their children were born after they came to Greenfield. So
Wonderful.
they lived in the Salinas Valley then for the rest of their lives.
Oh, that's precious.
But I am interested in because it's 120 or 30 years old, and I'm interested in the binding. It's rather Victorian looking.
Yes. Well, show us now some of these pictures on the wall of some of your family here. So we started with great grandpa from the Civil War, right?
Yes, he was a Thayer.
He was a Thayer, okay.
And he was my great grandfather. He was in the Union Army, wounded, discharged, and recovered, and re-enlisted until the end of the war. And then his son, my grandfather here, was Ernest Thayer, and his wife, Nora Forsyth.
Is that a wedding photo?
Yes, it is.
Okay, all right.
And then their daughter was my mother, here at their wedding picture.
Okay.
Ethel Thayer Clement and Alva Clement. And they spent all of their adult years in King City.
Okay.
And then my picture and my wife's at our wedding.
In 1959?
59, yes.
Okay. What was the date you got married?
Oh, August. No, wait a minute.
I
should not forget that. It was in
August.
May 10th.
Oh, May 10th.
May 10th.
May 10th, 1959.
Right.
Okay. And then these are your offspring?
Our 3 children.
Okay.
Frederick was the oldest.
Okay.
And his wife at their wedding. Scott is the next with his wife, Karen. And Jill is the youngest with her husband, Craig. And that...
Very nice.
That is the part of our family that has been centered mostly in the King City area.
Wonderful.
And our grandchildren.
Wow.